Israel's military campaign against Iran has claimed more high-profile targets in a major escalation, the Israel Defense Forces confirming the killing of Iran's top military and police chiefs. Iranian media reported a police chief and another officer were killed in a drone strike on Saturday, about 300 kilometers west of Tehran, as Israel kept up its air campaign against the Islamic Republic for a second day. And among the dead are Gholam Reza Marhabi, the chief of intelligence for the Iranian armed forces, Iran Revolutionary Guards chief Hossein Salami, Mohammad Bagheri, Iran's armed forces chief of staff, and General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, the head of Iran's missile program. And in total, the IDF saying it has killed 20 top Iranian commanders and 9 nuclear scientists since the launch of its operation on Friday, a massive blow to Tehran's military leadership. And with us on the broadcast this minute is Dr. Reza Khanzadeh, a senior foreign policy advisor to the U.S.-Iran Chamber of Commerce. Thanks very much for being here. I want to understand from you first what you make of what the two sides are trying to do at this point. And we have just gotten that statement from the Israeli Prime Minister where he's talking about how every site, every target of the Iranian regime will be targeted in the near future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So the latest reports coming out of Israel from the Prime Minister at this moment has to do mainly with what Tehran did with their airstrikes against Israel, where the targets or the areas where they hit were primarily, if not solely, residential areas, as opposed to the Israeli strikes on Iran back on Friday morning or late Thursday night, primarily targeted military sites, nuclear sites, military factories, with the exception of the residential building in Tehran, where the top military brass of the Iranian, military, the IRGC, live. But of course, there was also, casualties of that hit. Children and women were also killed. So it seems like that red line was crossed by Israel first, but then when Iran retaliated and essentially was a indiscriminate type of attack where they just launched as many missiles as they could, hoping that a certain number of them would land. Where they would land was not really of interest to Iran. They were just hoping that it would land. And that takes us back to your first question, as far as that strategy when it comes to how Israel is playing out this type of conflict compared to Iran. And again, up to this point, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying that their focus is on Iran's nuclear capabilities, nuclear sites, factories, and also the military sites, while Iran has been talking about just being a thorn in Israel's side, just attacking Israel wherever it can, causing mayhem, causing destruction, not really having any specific type of strategy when compared to Israel, while at the same time both countries are playing a high risk type of attack on each other, where this could escalate to a much higher degree. But up to this point, it seems like this type of conflict, although it may seem like it's out of control, it may seem like it could spiral into a much wider conflict, a much more perhaps regional conflict. These two countries have been preparing for these types of conflicts for decades. They have played out every war scenario, every war game to try to figure out what chess move they can make. And they're definitely not playing checkers. This is a very strategic, very serious type of attack from both sides. And that's why I think for now, although it's still pretty early into this conflict, only 48 hours, this conflict will maintain within the borders of Israel and Iran, and they will just be attacking essentially a tit for tat, back and forth. And now with those new reports from the Prime Minister of Israel saying that these attacks will be greater in scope and also wider in scope, where it's not just the nuclear sites or the military sites, he may be making a strong decision to go after different types of economic sites that are the lifeline or lifeblood of the regime, because there's a plan B or essentially a parallel path to these attacks for Israel, where they're also trying to entice or galvanize the people within Iran who are opposed to this regime to start to mobilize and unite and stand up and rise and revolt and strike
Right.
and try to do some type of regime change in parallel or in concert with these strikes by Israel.
Right. As we continue to dissect the messaging coming in from the two sides, in fact, on that very note, we've got some breaking inputs coming in right this minute. And in the latest, the Iran president vowing more severe response if the Israeli strikes persist. That's the word coming in from Iran at this point. The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, warning that there would be a more severe and powerful response if Israel continued to strike his country. I'm quoting from that statement now. The continuation of Zionist aggression will be met with a more severe and powerful response from the Iranian armed forces, quote unquote. And Pezeshkian said in a phone call with the Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. This comes after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issues a fresh threat to Iran. We just told you about that. He vowed to strike every site and every target of the Iranian regime in the near future. I just want to go back across to our esteemed guest who's been helping us make better sense and, just sharing his perspectives on what the two sides are trying to do at this point. I want to now take your comments on the latest coming in. And like you just said, like you were just pointing out, what the two sides are trying to do and what their strategy is looking like. The immediate question then also arises regarding the nuclear talks, what happens to the nuclear talks, and also overall for the scope of diplomacy.
Yeah, so unfortunately, these nuclear negotiations are obviously over. To put it simply, I wouldn't even say it's on pause or on a freeze. Unfortunately, when it comes to from the perspective of the Iranian regime, they continuously make the argument that we can't trust the United States regardless of who the president is. And once again, the Trump administration has proven them right, unfortunately. And no amount of attacks or sanctions lifting or sweet talks or even certain levels of threats will not bring Iran back to the table to discuss their nuclear program, because they've tried it multiple times in the past, and each time they've been let down. And this is the perspective from from Tehran. Now, what we've seen with these new reports coming out and these types of attacks, which is ongoing, even as we're even as we're talking right now. These attacks are essentially a war of attrition between Israel and Iran. So even with Iran making these comments that they will attack Israel with a full force and destroy parts of Israel, I believe that is more talk than actual action, because when you compare the militaries, especially the like the Air Force between the two countries, while at the moment Iran may have a larger military, Israel essentially has access to the United States, and that level of access to those types of military equipment that they can get from the United States is greatly in the advantage of Israel. So even when we see back to April of 2024 and also October of 2024, when there were these tit-for-tat attacks between Israel and Iran back then launched many more missiles towards Israel in the hundreds, if not 200s. But these past 48 hours, 36 hours, the number of missiles that Iran has been sending over to Israel has been far less, probably at half. Some analysts, some experts say that this was on purpose, because they want to kind of spread it out throughout the days and kind of wait and see when they can have a stronger, bigger attack. But I would argue that they are pretty stretched thin. The Iranian government has a finite number of missiles that they can send, and they have to be strategic because they're also stretched pretty thin when it comes to not just what's going on with them in Israel, but also regionally and also domestically. They have been at the weakest in their entire existence. The 40 plus years that this regime has been in control of this country, this is the weakest they have been historically. And it's at a point where they have to pick and choose their battles wisely. And for them, it's always been their existential threat. It's always been their survival is more important than anything else. They are willing to kill and murder their own citizens to make sure that they are still in power. So when it comes to a war with Israel or a war with their own people, they're going to side with those types of problems domestically in order for them to stay in power. Because if they're consumed, if they're essentially bombarded with these attacks by Israel, and their sole attention or like their sole responsibility is putting on this grand gesture to the world that we are strong and we are mighty and we will defend ourselves and we will destroy Israel, and they take their eye off of what's going on domestically, that could run the risk, because there are plenty of people within the Iranian regime who are considered low-ranking officials who are finding their way out the door. They are looking for a way to leave the regime. They're just waiting for the moment to be right where they can essentially defect and maybe side with the Iranian people who want to see regime change or some type of change with this government.
All right, I want to just hold that thought there. Some more breaking news coming in. This, of course, is a fast developing scenario that we are closely monitoring. The latest coming in at this point, the Iran-US mediator Oman saying no nuclear talks on Sunday. We were just talking about what happens to the nuclear talks. Now we have the Iran-US mediator Oman saying no nuclear talks on Sunday. There will be no sixth round of talks between Iran and the US. The talks have been cancelled amid the Israel-Iran tensions. That's the latest coming in. So that in itself is a very significant development, and that also from here onward throws up a number of questions that have already been doing the rounds regarding what this really means for West Asia. I want to go back across to our esteemed guest. We were just discussing about the possibility of the nuclear talks, and now we have Oman saying very clearly that the talks are not going to be taking place. I want to get in your assessment of what this means for the region and also what this really tells us about the situation on the ground at this point.
Yeah, so what this means for the region is if we go back during the Biden administration, or even during Trump's first term, there was very strong conversations within the Arab world in the Middle East about perhaps we should start our own nuclear program to counter that of Iran's. Specifically, Saudi Arabia comes to mind. And we have seen a shift in that type of rhetoric now during Trump's current presidency, where there was a talk about some type of consortium within the Middle East, where Iran and its Arab neighbors would work together when it comes to some type of nuclear program that is peaceful and civilian. And part of that had to do with these negotiations that were ongoing, because it was with the hope of kind of curbing Iran's nuclear program and being able to have verifiable checks and balances on it through the IAEA, and then having Iran's Arab neighbors be a part of that. And that was one of the sticking points back during Trump's first term when he walked out of the JCPOA, was because the Arab neighbors were not involved in those negotiations. Essentially, it was Europe, Russia, and China who were the benefactors of that deal. Even the United States and U.S. companies and businesses did not really benefit from that deal when sanctions were lifted. So now that these 6 round of talks have been canceled, and I don't see really any negotiations, in the foreseeable future, at least during the next 3 years of Trump's, last term as president, I don't see there being talks of any kind, whether it's direct or indirect between U.S.
All right.
And Iran when it comes specifically to their nuclear program.